This does not surprise me at all that we read this particular passage for one of Rebecca's sermons, because Rebecca's not like the rest of us. She's wonderful. Some of the rest of you are wonderful too, right? Rebecca, first got to know Rebecca when she and her family showed up in our church in Kansas. She and her very precocious children, and she just sort of jumped in there, and it's been such a joy to get to know her over the years and to listen to her wise teachings and her very funny thoughts. Rebecca is currently, I asked her this and now I've forgotten, director of distance learning or something like that at Heston College in Heston, Kansas. She runs a couple of blogs about distance learning and the world in general. And she's an expert in things like hate studies and Christian romance novels and all sorts of other curious things. So I have no idea what this is going to be about, but I'm looking forward to it. So welcome, Rebecca. Rebecca's, by the way, sitting in her home in Newton, Kansas right now. So thanks to the wonder of Zoom, here she is.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Wes, for the invitation. It is really a joy to be worshiping with all of you. It is a special joy to be worshiping again with Deb and Wes, who I have just been foundational, I think, in my spiritual growth in adulthood. And so I say adulthood, I was a grown-up when we met, but I got more of a grown-up, I think, as we went along. And as Wes said, my current job is in distant learning. I'm most recently coming from work as a sociology professor before I stepped into administration. And I study big emotions and how they deal, and how religion plays a part of big emotions. So I'm interested in right-wing movements in particular, and conservative political movements. And that's why I have spent the last 2 years in Judges. If you haven't read Judges recently, I'm preaching the gospel of Judges. Maybe that doesn't quite make sense, but I think it is the book for our time. I know in our small group, we mentioned already grieving a bit of what's been happening in our country. For me, this book has really unlocked a lot of thinking about nationalism, thinking about domination, and other systems really are distressing to me. And there's not a lot of comfort in thinking that people were wrestling with these same issues thousands of years ago. That doesn't feel encouraging, but I still think there's insight for us today. So thank you. I think the lectionary is in John, also a great book this, for this week, but we're going to be off lectionary for a bit. So thank you too for working with us, as I've chosen a long passage. If you've read this passage previously, I'm going to guess it wasn't in Sunday school or Good News Club or something like that. Maybe you're trying to do a read through the Bible and you get stuck in Judges and it feels like a lot of military history. So I think it's easy to skip this over. But I want to frame this really as it's military history, but it's really a story about patriarchy. And by patriarchy, I mean the way we organize society around the interests of men, which are seen as in conflict with the interests of others. And theologically, I'm going to argue that patriarchy is a sin. We're not talking about the great desert fathers of early Christianity. We're talking about a system that is designed to prop up men at the expense of other people. It's a way that the powerful consolidate power and they enrich themselves at the expense of others. I think it's also a sin because it distorts the image of God in God's image bearers, in all of us. It valorizes violence and domination and exploitation. And these are things that Jesus rejects. And it's a sin because it lingers in these old, damaged and damaging ways of relating when we're called new ways in Christ. And Paul is very explicit about this, right? There is no male nor female. We know that it's a sin because it bears bad fruit: domestic violence, including violence against children, militarism, environmental exploitation, addiction. These are some of the social problems linked to patriarchy. And practically, patriarchy is dysfunctional. It impoverishes whole societies by neglecting, dedicating the gifts of women, of non-binary people, and even of men who choose other expressions of masculinity, forms other than the violence and possessiveness that we see in patriarchy. So I was dismayed, unfortunately, when I started looking around for sample sermons about patriarchy, of how many sermons are preached in defense of patriarchy, when to me it seems like such a clear, we have so many, the harm done. Start by saying they're bad, then we don't have to worry, the question answers itself, and the fruits are very clearly damaging to people in the US. So we're going to think about these questions through Judges, and I'm going to ask us to think about patriarchy with us stones that get in our way. And these stones, when they pile on top of each other, form walls that separate and fortresses from which we can hurt each other. So we're going to approach it, as I said, through Judges. Judges broadly tells the story of a budding nation, and it's a book that's about the question of, should we have a king, or how should we be organized as a nation, and how will we, how, if at all, will power be shared, and how will it be transferred? And we see in the last verse of Judges that the power struggle to set these issues, it doesn't go well, because the book ends by saying everyone did what was right in his own eyes. That's where the situation ends up. There's no order. And if everybody had a conscience that was well formed, maybe this wouldn't be a big deal, but it's not going well for them. So we're going to pick up this crisis of national identity in chapter 9. So to go back even a little further, Gideon is the greatest of 15 judges who served as political and military leader of the confederation of tribes that made up Israel. And he had explicitly rejected being a king. He was, some people wanted him to be a king, and he said no. But after his death, the question of who's going to inherit his power arises. And here's the first stone of patriarchy, the first stone that patriarchy puts in our path. It seeks to consolidate power among men by using inheritance to pass along wealth, privilege, status. And that's been part of Western history for ages, that wealth and title is passed from father to firstborn son for a long time. And that's a practice called primogeniture. And it was abolished in the US in 1777. And this is one of the things we're kind of proud about, right? We said, no, you don't have to pass along property to your firstborn son. We're not going to have inherited status and wealth in the US. But it remained law in England until 1925. And though we've officially abolished it here, we know it's foundational still to the economic disparity in the US today. In the US today, families save more money for their sons to go to college than for their daughters. The result of that is higher levels of college debt for women than for men, even as women also graduate to lower paying jobs. In their 30s, the gap continues, with parents giving more money to their adult sons. In fact, about a rate about twice as much that parents support their adult sons compared to their adult daughters. Men continue to inherit family businesses at a much higher rate. And solidly 1/3 of family business owners believe that a family business should be passed along to a male heir, not to a woman. So in short, we don't have this mandatory gender-based inheritance system anymore, but we don't really need to have it mandated because we keep doing it anyway. That is where literally our families invest in patriarchy. That's where we put our money. All right, so let's go back to our story. Gideon, as according to the first part of Judges, has at least 71 sons. And now that just means he has a lot of sons, right? Because Abimelech has 70 brothers. Is it 70 or just a lot? Anyway, there's a lot of sons in this family. We don't get the mention of daughters. And again, that's part of patriarchy. Another stone, girls are erased. One of those sons is Abimelech. His mother is a concubine, but Gideon also has 70 sons with his wives. So Abimelech understands that his mother's status typically would prevent him from inheriting his father's power. So in this way, he's an outsider to his own family, right? He's a lesser favored child created with a lesser favored woman. And so here's another stone that patriarchy places in the path to justice, peace, reconciliation. It awards women status in the world based on their relationship to men. And the sexual relationships between men and women determine the social statuses of their children. And again, we see this in the US. It wasn't until the 1970s that a woman could get credit except through her husband. You probably know that today women continue to earn less, even for equal work with equal training, than men. But you might not know that a significant part of that gap is based on motherhood. Women who aren't mothers and men are much closer in salary. Where we get the biggest gap, this is also racialized, so I want to make sure we're clear about that. But just based on gender, the biggest gap is actually between mothers and people who aren't parents. In fact, mothers earn typically 28.4% less than fathers, with single mothers earning even less. But men who are fathers typically earn more than men who aren't. And we call this the motherhood penalty. You get salary docked for being a mother, and the fatherhood bonus. You get more money for being a father. We pay mothers less because we see childbearing and child rearing as distracting from work. So we say a mother can't be a good employee because she's busy taking care of kids. But we pay fathers more because we think that fatherhood stabilizes a man and gives him incentive to perform better because he wants to take care of his family. And so we think of him as a more committed worker. So men who are fathers are more typically, and we're talking about big trends, than men who aren't. So what's the result of this? Well, children are harmed by this. We have rampant child poverty in the US, about 16% of children in the US. And you probably know that nearly 20% of children in West Virginia live in poverty. That's 1 out of 5 children. Well, in our story, this less favored child, he is ambitious. He asks his mother's family to support his bid for power. And he explains it to them this way. You can either be ruled over by 70 of my brothers, none of whom are related to you, or will king. And they agree that they'll have more power if they rally behind Abimelech. So they provide him with some money to launch his effort to consolidate power. And so here's another hierarchy sets before us. It moves from shared power to consolidated power. And in this constant push to narrow, it's a constant push to narrow who has power. The judges included Deborah. The case if Israel moves to a monarchy where power is transferred from man to man. And so it's today that patriarchy, who will have power. I want to be clear here. This doesn't mean that poor men or men of color don't participate or benefit from patriarchy. It means that they do, but when dangerous zone, because patriarchy take people out. Right? The man who bullies women to be accepted by other men, if he doesn't find some other men to start bullying as well, he'll eventually himself off. Maternal relatives are foolish if they think that his brothers won't betray him. So here's what he does with their money. He hires some goons to murder all of his brothers, and each is slaughtered upon a stone. He goes into the family compound, it seems, and there's just a massacre. Only one, the youngest, survives, and to deliver this warning to his half-brothers. If they believe that what they did was right, may God bless them. But if they did wrong, then Abimelech will destroy them, and they will destroy Abimelech. This mutual destruction. And so we have two here that patriarchy puts in our path: the stone of family violence and the stone of intergenerational curse. And by this, I don't mean the rupture of trust caused by violence, the rupture of trust caused by family violence and how it lives on for generations. I don't mean something magic. I don't mean something unbreakable. I mean God's punishing people. I mean, it is a natural consequence that when there is violence in a family, it affects families for a long time. And we see this today in how family violence impacts families across those generations. You might be surprised to learn that being a victim of domestic violence does not actually increase your chances of growing up to be an abuser yourself. But witnessing domestic violence increases a child's risk of being an abuser or being an abuse victim. Right? That's children don't do what was them. Domestic violence, direct victims of domestic violence are very empathetic people who are very cautious about how they treat others and really seek to be tender. but instead they repeat what they see specifically their fathers do to their mothers. And that is what I mean by the intergenerational curse of family violence. And again, while I use the word curse here, I don't mean something magical. I don't mean something unbreakable. If this describes your family or your experiences, I want you to know that this is a curse that can be broken. We can do that. Need support doing it, but it can absolutely be done, and it's done all the time. Families are able to leave this behind. We don't have to live with family violence, but we likely be living with it if we live in a highly patriarchal society or in a very patriarchal family. So our reading picks up today after these events. Survivors of Abimelech's family begin to plot against him, this usurper, this outsider who gained power over them, this very bloodthirsty man. A cousin from Gideon's family, moves to town and emerges as a rival, potentially, to Abimelech. And after a harvest feast one night, the wine is flowing freely. Everyone is cursing their crummy king. Who is Abimelech? Gaul, that's the cousin's name. He shouts, why should he be our king? Why should we be his servants? He and his friend Zebul, his toady, right? Down with Abimelech. Make me your king, and you'll soon see what happens to Abimelech. I'll tell Abimelech, get up an army and come on out and fight. I hear this drunken posturing, right? And he's not dismantling it. He's not saying it's wrong. He's saying you win or you lose. You're the king or the slave. That second place is just the first loser, right? He promises not to remove Abimelech from power, but to humiliate him. You just wait to see what I do to him, right? The key here is that Abimelech's punishment will be public so other people can enjoy it. And then this drunken move, come on out and fight. You can just imagine him. I imagine him there, putting up his dukes or striking a T pose, yelling at an imaginary figure, or maybe he's got a fence post dressed up to look like Abimelech, and he's daring it and goading it. And so we get another stone of patriarchy here, that patriarchy rules so that only violence wins. Notice that Gaul doesn't suggest that they forego the idea of a king in favor of judges. He doesn't say, let's settle this peacefully, move more towards more democratic or fair means. Instead, he only promises to be a stronger strong man. He doesn't say the strong man is a bad idea. He just says, I'll do it even better. I'll be even more violent. The mayor, I say he's the mayor. We're not using that word in the text, but Zebul is this friend of Abimelech's, who also lives in the city. This is a little toady here. And he overhears Gaul's drunken threats, and he passes the word to Abimelech that he should come put down this potential revolt. Zebul suggests this plan of attack, that Abimelech's men divide into 4 columns and hide overnight in the fields surrounding the city. In the morning, Gaul is waiting outside of the city gates. I imagine him kind of hungover. Maybe it's not the exact next day. But anyway, he's outside the city gates. He's kind of wheeling and dealing this local power player, discussing matters of the city. He looks up and he swears he can see the mountains moving. He turns to Zebul, who he doesn't suspect of being a traitor. And he says, am I hallucinating, or are these mountains look like that there's men streaming down the mountains towards us? And Zebul says, no, that's just shadows. Nothing to be concerned about, just shadows. And so here, another of patriarchy, the lies we tell to protect it. In this case, the lie we call gaslighting, telling somebody not just do you not see it, but you can't even trust your own perceptions. And I want to say this is not unique gaslighting, to patriarchy. It's used by abusers, right? But we see it. Gaul insists, but now it's too late. Abimelech's forces are upon him. He turns accusingly to Zebul, who triumphantly reveals his villainous plan. It's like a movie, right? Now, where is that big mouth of yours? Who was it who said, who is Abimelech and why should he be our king? The men you taunted and cursed are right outside the city. Go out and fight. And this, again, to me, it feels so juvenile, right? Like a fist fight in a high school. Fight, 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 right? This force is pushing these men into violence. And this is it. This is another stone. This demand that power is all or nothing, be determined fighting. This is another stone. Well, the fighting is terrible, up to the very gates of the city. Gaul's men are killed and injured every step of the way. Second day of the battle, Gaul is again betrayed. Another person, unnamed in our story, reveals his battlefield strategy to Abimelech, and again towards justice and peace, as someone within Gaul's own camp allies themselves with the likely victor to win favor with a future overlord. Right? So someone who has inside knowledge of how Gaul is going to defend the city goes to Abimelech, tells them the plan. Why? Because they want to protect themselves. And how often do we do the same thing? Okay, I'm a white woman, and white women we know frequently do this. We choose to curry favor with patriarchy, hoping that it will protect us, rather than choosing solidarity with its victims. And we're its victims too, but we hope maybe I'll be a little less victimized, right? If I enable it, if I go along with it. So Abimelech captures this city of Shechem, where Gaul was fomenting revolt. He kills everyone in it. He levels it. He salts the ground, right? This is an effort to capture the city, to use it for some purpose, right? He's destroying the city so it can't be used for generations. Why? Why not just rule over it, right? Doesn't he want to be, wouldn't this enhance his power if he took the city? No. And again, we see another stone of patriarchy. Threats to the patriarchy must be destroyed. Well, the rural people of the area understand that they are in danger, and they flee to an area fort. When Abimelech reaches Mount Zalmon, he instructs his men to bring bundles of firewood to the base of the fortress. They set the whole thing in sanctuary inside. And this is another stone, patriarchy killing the innocent. It claims to protect women and children, but it's actually their greatest. And again, we know this over and over from the social science. In cultures that promote patriarchy, women and children are in worse shape than ever. They march on. Why? They've neutralized the threat that Gaul drunkenly was promoting, right? But now they're caught into a system of violence. So they march on to the fort at Mount Zalmon, right? They set it ablaze, right? The whole thing, all of these people killed. And then they keep going. They keep going. They march on to the city of Thebes. And again, the people have fled to the fortress inside the city. The stones that the people themselves had piled. They gathered on the roof to watch the battle, and perhaps to put themselves as far from the danger as they could be in case the fortress is breached. They see Abimelech's men gather wood once more. And I imagine that they have heard by now of the massacre at Mount Zalmon. Perhaps they can even smell the smoke from it, from the deaths of other innocent victims to this feud. And so we see more stones, community-wide trauma, militarism, environmental devastation. And we see these consequences today in Myanmar, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, in Palestine, in Kashmir, in Honduras, and in the US. It's not that women can't wage war or that men can't resist it. I'm going to say, of course, women can participate in patriarchy. Of course, men can and do resist patriarchy. But in general, the more patriarchal a culture, the more warfaring and militaristic that culture is as well. So Abimelech's troops marching on and on, people trapped in this tower, and they see Abimelech's men gathering the firewood, putting it below the tower to set them on fire. They climb up. Maybe they're seeking a view to better understand what's going on. It has to be confusing for them. They didn't do anything to anger the king. But perhaps they're also seeking the highest point, So when the slaughter does begin, when the fire comes, they're dying last. And that's another stone of patriarchy, forcing the most vulnerable to fight against each other for safety. Abimelech approaches, he shows his men how to burn the place down. And for no reason except his bruised ego, for no reason except to stop the potential threat of harm against him, right? The domino effect. But by now, we're 3 communities deep. And these people, again, they don't know what they've done or why they're being punished. 2 towns ago, there was a drunk man rousing anger about Abimelech. And now Abimelech is on his way to destroy them all, salt the earth, level it, kill all the people. From above, a woman unceremoniously settles the issue. She drops a millstone on Abimelech and kills him. And I say unceremoniously because this can't be a battle plan, right? She can't have she didn't haul that millstone up there. I want to show you a picture of a millstone here.
Yeah, pretty heavy.
This is from Maryland. And you can see this stone is made up from several stones that are pushed together and held with a metal circle, kind of holding it into shape. So did she pick up the whole thing? Did she pick up a piece of the millstone? I don't know, but she looks around her, and there it is. This is a depiction of the event by an artist named Kevin Raleigh, and I like this picture because she's pregnant. And I think about the superhuman feats that pregnant women can do, or stories of mothers, who can pick up a car and throw it off of their child trapped underneath. This desperation that she looks around and she finds the tools that is there and she uses it. And the story doesn't tell us her name. It doesn't tell us if she was strategic. It doesn't tell us much, but I imagine she looks out and she's able to say, who's the one in charge here? Who's the leader here? And maybe she knows that for this group of men, they are not here because of principle. They are here because they are enamored with the strong man figure. And if she can cut him down, maybe that will do something. There's not much hope otherwise. The next picture is Gustave Doré is a French illustrator who did some wonderful illustrations of the Bible in the late 19th century. Here's his illustration. She's not even in. Somebody behind Abimelech's here on the ground, and somebody behind looking up, pointing to her. But here it's all about Abimelech's death. I think I like Kevin Raleigh's picture better, where we see how strong she is, rather than this focus on Abimelech. So she does it, and we don't. Like I said, we don't know how. It couldn't have been 2 plans, but to me, this is just this act of hope. I think also she might understand the incredible. If she misses, she's probably going to die in an even more gruesome way than she would otherwise, right? She's coming at the king. She can't miss, because patriarchy does not tolerate self-defense. It is literally, in Abimelech's case, a scorched earth orientation to relationship, right? He's going to burn this place down and salt it and kill him. She injures him, and he recognizes that he is going to die. He calls for his sword bearer to come and kill him. Draw your sword and kill him. They can't say a woman killed him. So his servant ran him through and he died, right? Even in his death, what is he thinking about? He's thinking about, what will other men think of me? How do I perform toughness and violence? And above all, never being injured or insulted by a woman, that no woman could defend herself against me. That would be worse than anything. What's worse than death? Death by the hand of a woman. And so we look at what his men do. The end of the passage tells us when the Israelites were dead, they went home. They were never motivated by principle, by anything of value. Nobody steps in to take a leadership position. They wanted a strong man to silence for them. But when he disappears, they disappear too. And I wonder what happens in that moment. Do they look at each other kind of sheepishly, like, what are we doing here? Murdering women and children, chasing innocent people into a tower to set them on fire? And maybe they look at each other and they recognize that they have secrets to keep. All the murders at Shechem and Mount Zalman, how is their infliction of violence and destruction bonded them to each other? And this is a way that patriarchy bonds men, but it damages men. How are they going to go explain to others what they've done? Or maybe they just shrug and walk away, explaining to themselves that it wasn't their fault. They were led astray by this strong man. Or maybe they convinced themselves that they were patriots, doing what their king asked with honor. Well, we don't know. The text tells us at the end something important. And I think it might actually be the most important lesson in this story. Verse 56 says, "Thus God, the wickedness that Abimelech had done to his father by murdering his 70 brothers." Right? Abimelech's crime isn't just against his brothers he murdered, it's also against his father, who himself had said, "No kings." Right? So that's one injury he's done to his father. But lineage, right? The one youngest brother escapes, and then who else? Abimelech. Right? He's not worthy of inheriting his father's greatness. He's shown that he won't. And so it's not just murder, right? It's the eradication of a whole family line. His initial crime is those murders, ending or nearly ending. Okay, so what's a for almost snuffing out an entire family line and the line of a hero of the faith, right? Well, God repaid the wickedness of Abimelech that he had done to his father by murdering his 70 brothers. How was he repaid? He was repaid by really being killed by a woman, right? Death at a hand of a woman. Tenuous, of course. If she drops the stone and misses, she's going to be killed for daring to raise her arm in self-defense. And that's another stone. It turns women who exert their power into danger when really they're leaders. We've got 70 men's murders. The murders of 70 men are avenged by a lethal injury by a single woman. Think about what that tells us about how men's lives are valued under patriarchy. That they're so easily wiped out by a woman exerting power. And this is another stone. Patriarchy is so fragile. That fragility means it has to be heavily defended, heavily policed, narrowly defined, highly exclusive. If patriarchy were natural, we wouldn't have to put so much effort into it. Right? It means that men as well as women are sacrificed to it. We look at the harm, and there's no math that makes this make sense. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of people dead, all in defense of Abimelech's effort to seize and defend power. Abimelech's youngest brother's prophecy has come through. Abimelech is a bramble king, to quote from earlier, Judges 9. That's part of the passage we didn't read. He's a leader who's a danger to all those he serves, a parasite like the bramble that grows around trees and destroys them. And in the end, he destroys everything he touches, including those who enable him. Well, for us, the stones of patriarchy are heavy. We struggle to move them, and they are long lasting. It often takes centuries of wind and sand and water to change them. But they are movable. Like our words, stones can help or heal. Even the exact same words spoken differently, our actions can help or heal. All stones can be repurposed toward good. We can murder our brothers on a stone, or we can thresh on it. We can launch an attack from a fortress or seek safety in it. We can hide in the mountains for an ambush, or we can enjoy the beauty of creation. The same stone can be a weapon or a millstone that feeds a community. I'm going to leave today with 4 questions for us to think about. First, I've listed many stones of patriarchy that stand in the way of justice. What are others? I want to hear about, or invite you to think about how you've experienced them and times when you've thrown them in front of others. When have you put up a stone of patriarchy in front of others? How can we turn these tools of patriarchy into tools of liberation? That's the big question. I think probably in a different sermon, maybe that's what all we would be talking about. But I wanted to really get to the story first. Thinking about that story, is this story appropriate for church today? Is it appropriate for a peace church? Right? We're talking about people long ago. They were not Yahweh worshipers. Is this a helpful story for us? If you've never heard this story before, why do you think that is? If it's a story you have heard before, how might you be hearing it differently? And then lastly, what would our society look like if we had dismantled patriarchy 2,000 years ago, or 100 years ago, or 50 years ago? Or if we dismantled patriarchy today, what would our society look like in a generation? What kind of sin might we expect to be free from if we did this work? So those are our questions. I'm thankful that you let me think about this story today, and I'm looking forward to learning more about it from you. Thank you.